I appreciated Brother Webb taking the time to talk with and teach that group of in-service leaders. I also thought that the insights from Brother Grant Anderson were great. The next stage in our professional growth cycle after observation is feedback. This stage is critical to help the teacher understand their strengths and continue to improve as a teacher. As important as this stage is, we realize it can be difficult for both the person providing and the one receiving feedback.
I'll bet most of us have had the great lesson experience in our teaching career more than once. This is where someone watches us teach, and afterwards, the feedback we hear is, that was a great lesson. Well, that's nice to hear. It's not really helpful in providing meaningful feedback that can guide a teacher to continue doing the right things and improve in other areas.
I know when most of us hear the word feedback, we have numerous thoughts and feelings that come to our mind. I'm sure we've all had a variety of experiences from helpful to not so helpful. I really appreciated the comment from Brother Davis early in their broadcast about observation and feedback. When he commented, he said, "We are not comparing teacher against teacher. We are just helping them improve the skills they already have."
If we really come to believe that feedback is about helping each teacher develop their gifts and talents, many of our fears and perceptions begin to fade away.
During some recent interviews with some of our full-time and state teachers in the field, we asked, what are some things you've learned that foster meaningful and helpful feedback? Let's listen for some of the ideas that were shared, and I would invite you to take some brief notes.
It makes me nervous thinking of being observed, but like Kim said, I would welcome the feedback. Having never had it done, though, I think it would make me very nervous. But I would appreciate maybe hearing from a different source what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong.
The feedback, I would try to keep it uplifting and motivating. It is important to give the teacher a chance to evaluate him or herself. Give him a chance to share their feelings about what they experienced in their classroom situation.
Sometimes I have a tendency to want to help someone so much that I just focus on what isn't happening, really the wonderful teaching that's being done. And in most cases, it's not an overhaul, it's just a tune-up, just to change a few things, just really to help that conversion process. What are the small things we can do, small and simple things, to help that truth get into the hearts of the students?
A few years ago, we had a teacher who didn't want to teach anymore. One of the reasons is because someone came in to observe. And the nonverbal communication just intimidated her tremendously, where she literally came and asked to be released. There was a little bit of type stuff going on, and it was obviously not appropriate, but it had a huge effect on her. In fact, we never did get her back as a teacher.
Feedback is kind of caring. It's more than just saying somebody it's nice. It's showing somebody you're important to me. It's important for me what you're doing, and that's the reason why I'm coming back and look and see what you're doing. So this is actually the same what you experience by yourself. When somebody's coming to you and giving you feedback, it's a good feeling, and you have the feeling that somebody is noticing you.
To give an honest feedback is the best thing you can ever do to a teacher, but not offending. You can be honest, but also at the same time not offending. And I found personally that the best way to do that is always build on the good thing that the teacher have done. And at the end of that, you ask the teacher, I normally ask a teacher, what is it that you could have done better in this classroom? Then I start building from that.
Feedback ought to be, we value teaching to edify. We also value giving feedback that edifies.
With the area director now, because of the way that he treats us, I know that his motives are pure, and so I can trust him. I know that he's going to treat me as a person of worth, and because of that, I can take individual specific help, whereas before I would just want general ideas coming my way because I didn't want him to attack the way I was teaching. But there's no reason to not feel confident that I'm safe in his hands.
Something with our area director and his assistant that I think is critical to feedback is they're constantly studying teaching and improving teaching. I mean, how can anybody give feedback if it's not on our mind and we're not trying to improve our own teaching and talking to other people, improving it? And I see them, that they are constantly trying to improve teaching and themselves. And we feel that from them. We feel that just emanates from them, this desire to be a better teacher themselves, and we want to follow that because they do it.
You do need to hear what can be changed, but make sure that there's a balance of here's what you're doing right also.
I like honest critiquing, and he's pretty honest. I mean, if he sees something in the way we're teaching that he feels we could do better, he will tell us, and I appreciate that because it has made me a better teacher to have him be honest in helping me become better at what I do.
The biggest blessing to me is to hear really what I can do better and to know that I can really trust them. If I feel like they're not going to give me real feedback, then there's a lack of trust because I don't feel like they can really talk to me candidly.
While it's still fresh in his mind, he'll email the teacher back and, give feedback that way. And I think that's helpful. Then you've got something in writing and saying, okay, this is what he meant.
I really appreciate those thoughtful comments. That was a good list of recommendations. I'm not sure if I got them all. Why don't we compare notes as a group and then talk about what we heard?
Sounds good. I'll go ahead and get started. One of the first things that stood out to me is the importance of the feedback being uplifting and motivating. That is such an important element to this process. In fact, there is some counsel in our Administering Appropriately handbook under the heading Commending and Correcting. It emphasizes the Lord's counsels to strengthen your brethren in all your conversation.
That really is the heart of feedback, trying to build the individual and improve teaching through genuine commending and loving correction. It reminds me of an experience I had about 10 years ago, which has impacted me. I had an area director who came and observed my teaching one day. He spent the entire day in my classroom. Afterwards, we met in my office and he said something like this: "Mark, you're a good teacher, and with a bit of work, you can become a great teacher." I have to say I was a bit taken back by his comment. Any feedback I'd received up to that point was of the great lesson variety that we mentioned earlier. But I was curious and asked him what he meant. He then showed me notes and suggestions that I knew accurately described some of my strengths and also pinpointed some of my areas that I could improve. I knew that he genuinely wanted to help me improve, and I was grateful for his honesty. It not only helped me improve, but it was actually a turning point in my career. It led me to change a lot of my approach in teaching.
Mark, I think an experience like that would have benefited many of us. In line with what's been said, I also like the idea from the video clips that feedback is a kind of caring. I don't know that we've looked at it in that light before. In fact, I'm sure many of us have thought of it as kind of controlling. This is such an important feeling that it needs to come from the one giving feedback. When I coordinated, that was essential when trying to help stake teachers improve. We certainly need a heightened sensitivity among this group.
It was nice to hear the stake teachers share how they were a little nervous about feedback, but still saw the value of it and wanted that from their coordinators. They also offered some valuable suggestions that I noted here on my paper. They included creating a balance between discussing strengths and weaknesses, providing honest feedback, that was mentioned in particular, and then handing the teacher something later on, or maybe email them later notes the observer took with some praise and suggestions. They found that very useful and helpful.
It was also good to hear words like edifying being associated with feedback. I believe that can be done if the one providing feedback takes the approach Brother Wimpy mentioned, that we are going to provide a tune-up and not an overhaul. I also like the teachers saying how they felt safe in the care of their supervisor after receiving feedback. That seems to help the one receiving the feedback to really open themselves up and become willing to do just that, receive it well.
Understanding some of these things has made me even more aware of the importance of having a strong relationship with the teacher. And as we talked about earlier, it's vital to have some kind of preparation conversation. Without that conversation first, dropping in to watch a teacher might actually do a disservice to the relationship rather than helping the teacher.
So if we were to summarize what we've talked about so far, I would say that in order to begin the feedback process, we need to have an edifying conversation focused on helping. If we can create that focus, then we'll have established a good foundation to begin helping a teacher succeed. Several even mentioned the importance of inviting the teacher to share how they felt the lesson went and what they might do differently. That can create a wonderful conversation which leads to helping the teacher without it becoming a threat.
You know, one thing I'm still a little bit unclear on is how to do all this. I mean, these are good ideas, but using them effectively can be difficult. We've talked about a lot of things here.
You know, that's a good point, and I'm sure those watching feel much the same way.
I'm glad that you brought that up. We were able to ask those we interviewed, stake and full-time teachers, along with area directors, coordinators, and stake supervisors, what has helped them provide feedback that can really bring about meaningful change and growth in gospel teachers. Please listen carefully and write down some of the things that are shared.
I think maybe even more feedback. It's always gentle. In fact, it's so gentle I always have to kind of pull it out of him. And so a little bit, you know, to make it more productive, make sure the feedback's there.
Be specific in that which is, you see this good. The reason you want to be specific is you want to, because maybe a teacher doesn't really know why it was so good. And if you tell them why it was so good, then that will reinforce that behavior, that activity, so they'll want to do it more.
But it's always good to hear what you do right, so you can continue to try and do that. And they always give me a good suggestion. And sometimes I know what I need to improve on, and sometimes it's a whole new revelation. Giving positive feedback first is a good thing, and building the person up, and then making a suggestion. Using the Green Handbook is great as well, because there's a specific guidelines there that will help us, and they're written down, and there's no attacking.
I always give them the notes that I have, and in one case already where I've come back and watched the same teacher twice, they were able to pull out the form and the notes and the experience that we had the previous time, and we were able to make some comparisons as opposed to just what did we think that we were, doing, or what was, has there been any measurable improvement?
Rather than try to give them 5 or 6 things that I've noticed they could work on, which I had done in the past and made that mistake of doing, I pick one thing. What's one thing I know that they can change tomorrow or the next day?
And I try to think, which would be the best bit of a suggestion I could give the teacher, the most helpful. And sometimes it's not the obvious. Sometimes there's something, the thing that's really affecting this whole class is the climate. And so I could give a suggestion on this question or on his lesson preparation, but really those can come in the future. And so I'll be selective. And so I might have 10 things written on the back of the card, what to improve on, but I'm only going to give him 1 or 2. I'm going to give him the 1 or 2 that I think would help him the most right now.
If he said to me, have you thought about doing this, or you really need to try this, and he gave me some specific ways to do it, that would be very helpful for me, instead of just saying, well, you certainly didn't ask any questions. And I'd go home and think, okay, I've got to ask questions. If he would say, give me some examples of some good questions or how to ask a good question, that would help me.
After the visit from the observer, it would be so helpful to have the feedback very quickly. It's so easy to forget how we've taught a lesson. And
when our coordinator's given me feedback, I like that he is direct with me, tells me exactly what I need to do, and also he teaches himself. So he gives me real-world applications. In my class, I have done this, try it in your class. And I feel better about that because I know he's teaching an early morning class right now as well. And so it makes a lot of sense that we can do that together.
Teachers need feedback. They need the help. They need evaluation. And I've found that so many times I'll say, check the Teaching the Gospel Handbook pages 37 through 38 or 12 through 14, and we'll go there and we'll look at it.
They leave us with practical things that we see we can put into practice the very next class period, and we see a positive change. And that gives us greater faith and confidence to listen to them, because we can see immediate results. Oh yeah, this works. That is a better way.
So in our feedback time, it would be helpful to me to look at what we've talked about in service. Did I apply it today? And how could it have strengthened my lesson if I had?
when a coordinator visits my class, it's really important that I get feedback. And that feedback will depend on how we prepared for the meeting, what I asked the coordinator to examine me on, for want of a better phrase, and then to provide the feedback.
Well, that all sounds simple enough. Let's get out of here. I'm ready.
Yeah, simple, Joel. I've got a list of about 9 or 10 things here. That should be easy to remember the next time that I'm sitting down in front of that stake teacher who feels overwhelmed.
You know, as I looked at my list, I want to say that most of what was said really falls under the idea that the observer should give specific praise and suggestions. Let's keep that in mind as we talk about these.
That's good. With that said, I thought it was interesting when the first teacher said that she sometimes has to pull the feedback out of her supervisor. We need to be willing to believe that each teacher really does want to do their best as they serve the Lord. I believe we can encourage and coach them with appropriate feedback from the newest to the most experienced teacher.
You know, the one idea that really stands out to me is being very specific when giving feedback. That can be challenging. I think back to an earlier comment about going in and watching teachers and struggling to really know what to say that will make a difference. In the last segment, Brother Maines taught that we will improve as we watch more and more classes. So repetition and breadth of experience in observing will help us eventually give better feedback.
You know, I also noted his suggestion of not just stating the obvious, but trying to identify the real issue that could help the teacher improve. That's going to take practice and some thoughtful pondering on the observer's part.
I'll bet that is even easier to do when the one giving feedback is familiar with the standards of good teaching. When they're fluent in the language and the standards of the handbooks and the prophets, they can begin to identify more readily sound teaching fundamentals and practices.
That reminds me of the suggestion to point the teacher to the handbooks for ideas and helps when giving feedback. What a great thing to do so they can continue to reflect on the strengths you've identified and receive help beyond the moment of being observed.
I have one more thought on using the handbooks, and I think we should make it a third point as we clarify the things we can do to provide effective feedback, and that's to incorporate principles of effective teaching. I've heard Brother Webb emphasize the idea that giving feedback is like teaching an individual one-on-one. Principles of how to teach as outlined in the Teaching the Gospel handbook, such as effective teaching edifies, could be adapted to effective feedback edifies.
There are some good parallels there. I know there's a section in the handbook where we're instructed to focus on learner readiness, participation, and application. So in a like manner, we should be sure that the person receiving the feedback is ready, participates in the conversation, and that the feedback is applicable.
Carl, that's very good counsel. If I knew a student in my class had some behavior that needed to be changed, I wouldn't single him out in class and focus on what he was doing wrong. I would teach gospel doctrines and principles, emphasizing why living a certain way is a blessing and encourage change for the better. I would teach, not tell.
That's a great point. Now, if you don't mind, let me get your thoughts about a different but related subject. Do you think it's best to provide immediate feedback, or is it okay to pause and think about what took place in the class and get with the teacher later that day or even another time?
You know, I don't think feedback has to always follow immediately. If it can and the observer is confident with their conclusions, then it's very appropriate. But I think we need to consider the teacher's schedule and the observer's assurance in the feedback they have to give. Both of these considerations might lead the observer to providing the feedback later on for it to be most beneficial to the teacher.
I think you're right on with that. I also like the practice of providing the teacher with a hard copy of notes and suggestions so they can review them. This can help a teacher as they seek to improve in the future.
And limiting the suggestions for improvement was also something worth noting. One coordinator mentioned how he learned the hard way to limit ideas to improve. That sometimes goes against our nature in our desire to help them get better, but it is always good counsel.
And in particular, they mentioned practical ideas that can be implemented immediately. One teacher said that when that occurs, that he developed greater confidence and trust in the feedback. So the next time they had a chance to receive some, there's less anxiety.
I'm really glad for this conversation. You know, it's reminding me of something in the 23rd section of the Doctrine and Covenants. In this section, the Lord gives some counsel or feedback to 5 brethren. They desired to know their duty. They came to Joseph, and while teaching them, what their duty was, the Lord uses the phrase, "Thou art under no condemnation." I like that idea, that we can receive help from someone, but that doesn't mean we are also being condemned for what we've done or not done in the past. If we can come to believe that receiving feedback isn't about being condemned, but another opportunity to become better at what we love to do, which is teaching students the gospel, we will see amazing things take place in the lives of our teachers and, more importantly, the students. Brethren, thank you for your help and insights.